The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the city's notorious rush hour traffic was beginning to snarl. A domestic disturbance, escalating into something far more sinister. "Shots fired," the dispatcher's voice crackled. "Residents on Laurel Avenue. Possible homicide. My partner, Detective Maria Rodriguez, and I were only a few blocks away, navigating the slow crawl of cars. A pit formed in my stomach. Domestic calls were always a gamble. They could be nothing, or they could be the kind that stayed with you forever. When we pulled up to the quaint two-story house on Laurel Avenue, it was a picture of suburban calm, almost idyllic, if not for the frantic neighbor waving us down from the lawn. "In there!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. At the front door, I heard shouting, then a crash, then a shot. We entered cautiously, guns drawn. The air inside was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and something else, something metallic and sickening. The living room was a scene of immediate, violent chaos. A sprawling ornate vase lay shattered on the polished hardwood floor, its fragments glinting like scattered jewels. And in the center of it all, a man lay motionless, face down in a spreading pool of crimson. Maria was first to the body, her face grim. Victim is Michael Thorne, 58, single GSW to the back of the head. Appears to be an execution-style killing. Thorne was a well-known local architect, highly respected in the community. What kind of person would do this? Then I saw him. Sitting quietly in an armchair in the corner of the room, oblivious to the carnage, was an elderly man. His silver hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean but rumpled. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes wide and unseeing, a faint, almost childlike smile playing on his lips. He was holding a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "Sir," I approached him slowly, my gun still up but my voice soft. "Are you all right? What happened here?" He didn't react. No flinching, no acknowledgement of our presence, or the dead man just feet away. He continued to gaze into the middle distance. Gently stroking the wooden bird, "It's Arthur." The neighbor, now standing hesitantly in the doorway, whispered, her voice laced with fear and pity. "Arthur Jenkins, Michael's father-in-law. He lives here. Arthur Jenkins." The man everyone in the neighborhood knew. A retired librarian, mild-mannered, quiet. But recently, his family had started talking about his rapid decline. Alzheimer's, dementia. The blank stare, the childlike smile. It was consistent with the advanced stages of cognitive degeneration. Maria secured the scene and began directing. "Uniformed officers, check for witnesses, start a perimeter. Ben, get forensics in here and try to get something out of him." She gestured towards Arthur. I holstered my weapon and knelt beside Arthur. "Mr. Jenkins, can you tell me your name?" He hummed softly, still stroking the bird. His eyes briefly flickered towards me, but there was no recognition, no understanding, just a void. On the coffee table next to him lay a revolver, a .38 caliber, old-fashioned but recently fired. I could smell the fresh gunpowder. It was right there, easily accessible to Arthur. His fingerprints would likely be all over it. This was Thorne's gun, registered to him. The shell casing lay nearby. The initial picture was grim, chillingly simple. A man in the grip of dementia, perhaps disoriented or agitated, had somehow picked up a gun and shot his son-in-law. It was a tragedy, a sad, heartbreaking accident, a product of a mind lost to illness. That's what the scene screamed. But as the first forensic technicians began to arrive, a small, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye. On Arthur's shirt sleeve, just above his right wrist, was a tiny, faint smudge. It looked like grease. Not the kind of grease you'd get from handling a gun, but something heavier, thicker, like engine grease. I carefully pointed it out to Maria. She leaned in, her brow furrowing. "Engine grease? On a retired librarian with dementia? That doesn't fit the narrative, Ben." The simple tragedy was already beginning to unravel. My gut told me this wasn't just a sad accident. This was something far more complicated, far more sinister. And the innocent blank stare of Arthur Jenkins suddenly felt less like a symptom of illness and more like a carefully constructed facade. The scene was a tragedy, a sad story of dementia's grip, or so it seemed. But that tiny smudge of engine, grease on Arthur Jenkins's sleeve, kept nagging at me. A librarian, even a retired one, wasn't usually tinkering with engines. Maria, always a step ahead, had already ordered forensics to take samples from Arthur's hands and clothing, specifically looking for unusual residues. While the house was being processed, we tried to get Arthur to talk, to confirm the simple narrative the scene presented. He remained in the armchair, clutching his wooden bird, humming softly. When I tried to ask him about the gun or Michael Thorne, his eyes would dart away, a fleeting flicker of something, fear, before returning to that blank, placid stare. It was a perfect performance of amnesia, if it was one. The doctors, when they arrived, confirmed his advanced Alzheimer's diagnosis, reinforcing the idea that he was incapable of understanding or recalling the events. They suggested he be moved to a care facility immediately. The common wisdom, the medical evidence, screamed, sad accident, but my gut screamed otherwise. While the medical professionals were focused on Arthur's apparent cognitive decline, Maria and I started digging into Michael Thorne. Thorne, the architect. His practice was successful, his reputation spotless. But spotless reputations often hid the most interesting secrets. We checked his recent projects, his finances, his personal life. Nothing immediately jumped out. He was a pillar of the community, or so everyone said. Then the first forensic report came back. The gun, a .38 caliber revolver, was indeed Michael Thorne's, registered to him. Arthur Jenkins's fingerprints were all over it, consistent with someone who had handled it recently. This solidified the dementia-induced accident theory for almost everyone in the precinct, except for Maria and me, because the report also confirmed the smudge on Arthur's sleeve. It was synthetic industrial grease, the kind used in heavy machinery or specialized robotics, not something you'd find in a typical household, especially not in a retired librarian's. And then there was the shattered vase. The shrapnel from the vase was scattered in an unnatural pattern. Some pieces had flown outwards, but others were lodged in a way that suggested an impact from behind Michael Thorne, not simply from a struggle with Arthur standing in front of him. This grease, Maria said, tapping the report, and the vase fragments, they don't fit the confused old man story. Why would Arthur, in his condition, be near industrial machinery? And how did a vase shatter in that precise way during a simple shooting? I remembered the scene vividly. Thorne was face down. The shot was to the back of his head. If Arthur had shot him from the front, Thorne would likely have fallen forward. If Arthur shot him from behind, it would be a very specific, deliberate angle. Given the vase fragments, could the vase have been shattered by something else during the shooting? We decided to look into Arthur Jenkins's life before his alleged decline. What did he do? Who did he know? Turns out, before becoming a librarian, Arthur had a brief forgotten career in industrial mechanics during his youth, working in factories assembling complex machinery. He was good with his hands, meticulous, and had a strong technical mind. The dementia diagnosis, however, overshadowed everything now. The next day, during the process of preparing Arthur for transfer to the care facility, a new detail emerged. A nurse, while helping him change, noticed something odd about his feet. He had a small, almost surgical scar on the sole of his right foot, very fresh. And there was a slight limp, subtle but noticeable. He was also favoring his right hand, making subtle, repetitive squeezing motions with his fingers, almost as if exercising them. My mind raced. A mechanical background, industrial grease, a hidden injury, a specific hand movement, and the seemingly perfect, unyielding blankness in his eyes. The accident was becoming an impossibility. The cracks were starting to show, not in Arthur's mind, but in the facade he was presenting. We weren't dealing with a victim of dementia. We were dealing with a master of deception. The revelation of Arthur Jenkins's past as an industrial mechanic and the presence of synthetic industrial grease on his sleeve had shattered the simple narrative of a dementia-induced accident. His feigned amnesia, once a medical certainty, now felt like a carefully constructed wall. We had to dig deeper, beyond the doctor's assessment, to understand the man behind the blank stare. That small, fresh scar on Arthur's right foot, combined with his subtle limp and the repetitive squeezing motion of his right hand, was a crucial anomaly. Maria and I persuaded the medical team to allow for a more thorough, non-invasive examination, focusing on these physical signs. What we found was startling. The scar wasn't surgical. It was a burn mark, consistent with prolonged contact with a heated metallic surface. And the limp wasn't from old age. It was a slight muscle strain, indicating a recent strenuous exertion involving his right foot. The hand exercises? They seemed to be an unconscious reaction to a recent forceful grip. This wasn't the slow decline of a man lost in his mind. This was the aftermath of a physical struggle or a precise, forceful action. It hinted at the use of some kind of tool or mechanism. We returned to Michael Thorne's living room, now thoroughly processed by forensics. But I needed to see it again through this new lens. If Arthur wasn't just a confused old man, then the scene had to tell a different story. Maria pointed out the precise placement of the shattered vase fragments. They were scattered, yes, but almost like they were part of a larger, sweeping motion, not a simple knockover. What if the vase wasn't just knocked over, Maria mused. What if it was part of a trap or a distraction? Then I focused on the gun again. Thorne's .38 revolver, found on the coffee table. Arthur's fingerprints were all over it. This was the weakest link in our theory of a faked amnesia. How could Arthur get his prints on the gun without actually firing it or leaving other traces, unless he was the one who fired it? But the lack of gun residue on Arthur's hands, despite the prints, remained a glaring inconsistency. If he fired it, even with gloves, there should be some trace, some disruption. The only way for his prints to be on the gun, and for him to be the killer but not leave residue, was if he handled it after it was fired, or if it was fired by an external mechanism that applied his hand to the gun after the fact. This led us back to the engine grease. And Arthur's background. What if Arthur had built something that could fire the gun remotely, but still somehow imprint his fingerprints? It sounded like something out of a spy movie, but the evidence was pushing us there. We widened our search beyond just Michael Thorne's recent activities. We looked into Arthur Jenkins' relationship with Thorne. Was it truly harmonious? Turns out Thorne had recently drawn up a new will, leaving a substantial portion of his estate, not to his wife, Arthur's daughter, but to a previously unknown charitable foundation. This had caused a significant rift within the family. Arthur, though seemingly frail, was notoriously protective of his daughter's inheritance and furious about Thorne's decision. The motive wasn't just dementia. It was a very clear, very human motive for financial gain. We checked Arthur's personal belongings, especially anything related to his past as a mechanic. Tucked away in a dusty box in his old bedroom closet, we found it. A collection of old schematics for specialized industrial tools and intricate mechanisms. Not just assembly plans, but blueprints for custom-built components. Among them I found a sketch for a spring-loaded self-gripping firing mechanism, designed to hold and discharge small devices, with a pressure plate at the base. The drawing was meticulous, labeled with Arthur's neat handwriting. And then another more recent drawing. A detailed diagram of a trigger extension with a biometric pressure pad designed to be operated by a foot. The small, burned scar on Arthur's foot, the limp, the faint grease, the repetitive hand motions. It all clicked. He hadn't just fired the gun. He had designed a device to do it. Arthur Jenkins was not a victim of dementia. He was a brilliant, calculated killer, using his perceived illness as the ultimate shield. He had built a device, possibly hidden inside a piece of furniture or the shattered vase itself, designed to hold Thorne's own gun. He had then lured Thorne into position, used his foot to trigger the device, and then, in a chilling final act, forced Thorne's hand onto the gun, leaving his own fingerprints. He was a silent accomplice to his own crime, the puppet master manipulating the scene to look like an accident. The perfect performance was far more intricate than we could have imagined, and the truth was about to blow the lid off this quiet suburban tragedy. The discovery of the custom-built firing mechanism schematics and the biometric foot trigger design within Arthur Jenkins's hidden belongings irrevocably shattered the facade of his dementia. The industrial grease, the burn mark on his foot, the specific pattern of the shattered vase, it all coalesced into a chillingly clear picture of premeditated murder. Arthur wasn't confused. He was calculating, using his perceived illness as the ultimate shield. We had enough to bring him back to the precinct, this time not for questioning, but for an official interrogation as the primary suspect. The doctors from the care facility were bewildered. They protested, citing his advanced Alzheimer's, but we had concrete evidence of his capabilities. In the interrogation room, Arthur sat calmly, clutching his wooden bird. His blank stare remained. Maria began laying out the evidence piece by piece. The gun, his prints, the missing shell casing, which we now theorized was caught by his device, the industrial grease, the burn on his foot, the hidden schematics. Each revelation was delivered with a precise, almost surgical calm. As Maria described, the custom-built foot trigger, I saw it. A flicker, not in his eyes, but in the subtle tensing of his jawline, a barely perceptible clenching of his right hand. He was listening. He understood when she placed the framed photograph of the Thorne family's new will, showing the substantial inheritance diverted to the charitable foundation, on the table. Something shifted. The wooden bird slipped from his grasp, clattering, to the floor. For the first time, a genuine emotion crossed his face. A flash of pure, cold fury. It was fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar blankness, but it was enough. He was going to give it all away. Arthur's voice was a guttural whisper, raspy from disuse but perfectly clear. All of it. After everything. After my daughter. Sacrificed so much for him. It was an insult, a betrayal. The amnesia was gone, the performance had ended. Or perhaps the truth was too overwhelming to contain any longer. He then, in a chillingly methodical manner, began to confess. His voice was slow, deliberate, narrating the events with the precision of a master craftsman. He described how Michael Thorne had changed his will, how the news had filled him with a quiet, burning rage. He felt Thorne was spitting on his daughter's years of devotion. Arthur, the mild-mannered librarian, decided justice needed to be served, a justice the courts couldn't provide. He detailed how he had spent months planning. Using his forgotten knowledge of industrial mechanics, he designed and built a compact device, small enough to be hidden within the base of the ornate vase. This device was essentially a remote-controlled, spring-loaded arm that could extend, grip Thorne's own revolver, which Arthur had secretly practiced handling to get his prints on it without ever firing it, and fire it. The crucial component was the foot pedal, disguised as a harmless floor mat, connected by a thin, flexible wire that could be quickly pulled away. The biometric sensor on the gun's grip ensured that it would only fire if Thorne's own hand was pressed onto it, making it look like Thorne was the one holding the gun. The day of the murder, he lured Thorne into the living room, ostensibly to discuss family matters. He positioned Thorne in front of the vase. We argued about the will, Arthur recounted, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He scoffed at my daughter's devotion. He called her weak. That was the trigger. Arthur activated the device with his foot, pushing Thorne's hand onto the biometric grip. The gun fired. The vase shattered from the force, concealing the device's recoil in the wire. Arthur immediately detached the foot pedal, rolled it up, and slid it into a hidden compartment he'd built into the bottom of his armchair. He then wiped any residual traces from his hands, precisely as forensics had found. And then, the performance began. He simply sat down, adopted the blank stare, and started stroking his wooden bird, waiting for someone to find them. He had calculated every detail, every potential flaw, even the engine grease. He had used it to lubricate the intricate parts of his device, and a tiny bit had transferred to his sleeve during assembly. The burn on his foot was from a brief, accidental contact with a heated component during the final test. The Alzheimer's was a gift, Arthur concluded, a faint, chilling smile returning to his lips. It was the perfect disguise. No one would ever suspect a man who couldn't remember his own name. The confession was damning. Arthur Jenkins was not just a killer. He was a cold, calculated mastermind, meticulously planning every step to exploit the very weakness he feigned. His detailed account, filled with technical specifics only the killer could know, left no room for doubt. The amnesiac killer was a perfect performance, but the truth, once revealed, was far more chilling than any tragedy of illness. Arthur Jenkins's confession, delivered with chilling clarity and pride, laid bare the intricate machinations of his perfect performance. The unassuming librarian, once a victim of a cruel disease in the public's eyes, was now revealed as a calculated killer who had exploited his perceived illness to orchestrate a flawless murder. The detailed breakdown of his custom-built device, the spring-loaded firing mechanism, the biometric foot trigger, the hidden compartment in the armchair, left no doubt of his guilt. The arrest of Arthur Jenkins sent shockwaves through Elmwood, eclipsing even the drama of Raymond Vance's earlier demise. The public, who had initially sympathized with the poor old man caught in a tragic accident, was now grappling with a profound sense of betrayal. The news headlines screamed, "Dementia, a deception, the librarian's labyrinth, and mastermind in mids." The conversation shifted from the tragedy of Alzheimer's to the terrifying potential for deception and the chilling depths of human cunning. The trial of Arthur Jenkins became a psychological spectacle. His defense team, initially baffled by his sudden recovery and confession, attempted to argue temporary insanity or a unique form of lucid interval psychosis, trying to salvage some shred of the dementia narrative. But Arthur himself, during the initial court appearances, remained disturbingly articulate, recounting his motives and methods with dispassionate precision. He seemed to relish the intellectual challenge he had posed to the police, his mind sharper than any of us had initially imagined. "I simply exploited the preconceptions of a compassionate society," he stated calmly during a pre-trial hearing, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "They wanted to believe it was illness. It was efficient. My role shifted from investigator to witness. I testified about the industrial grease, the burn mark, the discovered schematics, and Arthur's chillingly detailed confession. Maria provided evidence of his meticulous planning and the subtle discrepancies that initially raised our suspicions. The evidence was overwhelming, thanks to our relentless pursuit of those small, seemingly insignificant details. The case presented unique challenges to the legal system. How do you argue against a man who perfectly mimicked an illness for months, even years, to create the ultimate alibi? What did it say about society's willingness to believe a narrative that fit neatly into its understanding of tragedy? Ultimately, the jury, after weeks of deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Arthur Jenkins was sentenced to life in prison. He received the verdict with the same calm, almost serene demeanor he had displayed in the interrogation room. As he was led away, his gaze met mine. There was no defiance, no regret, just a hint of an almost imperceptible, knowing smile. A silent acknowledgement of the game he had played and the way he had almost won. In the aftermath, the case left a lasting impact on the Elmwood Police Department. It forced us to reevaluate our assumptions, to look beyond the obvious, and to question every perfect scenario. It was a stark reminder that the most dangerous criminals might not be the ones hiding in the shadows, but those hiding in plain sight, exploiting our empathy and our preconceptions. The legacy of Arthur Jenkins wasn't just a solved murder case. It was a cautionary tale, a chilling testament to the power of a perfectly executed deception. It served as a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound mysteries are hidden not by complex clues, but by the simplest, most human facades.